Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about industrialization and workers. More specifically, we're going to talk about big businesses and how they used vertical consolidation and horizontal consolidation to control different industries. We're going to talk about how the relationship changed between workers and business owners. We're also going to talk about what life was like for working families and a new type of government that emerged during this time known as socialism. Alright, so big business gaining the competitive edge. So to start us off, we're going to just talk about a few different terms that will be used throughout this section. First one here is monopoly. A monopoly is when a company has complete control over a product or service. So essentially, they control an entire industry. So basically how this would work, a big business would buy out its competition or drive his competition out of business. And then once this business became the only one that could sell a product or service, then they could raise prices, and people are then forced to pay that price because, again, they have either bought out all of the competition or drove all of the competition out of business. And they essentially are now the only ones that sell that product or service. In the late 1800s, there were federal laws that were passed to prevent such practices. This obviously did not stop all monopolies because, the government refused to attack some powerful business leaders. And we'll talk more as to why that is a little later on. Alright, oligopoly. This is when a few large profitable firms control a market. Startup costs normally were expensive. This led to less competition because only a few could really afford to participate in those industries. However, still some exist today, like with cars, breakfast cereals, and household appliances. A cartel, this is when a loose association of businesses that makes the same product and works together to control prices. This limits the supply to keep prices up. Limits supply to keep prices up. Andrew Carnegie, he had a company, a steel company. It was called Carnegie Steel. It started in 1889. Very successful. Soon he had enough money to buy all of the companies that performed all of the phases of steel production, from the mines that produced iron ore to the furnaces and mills that made pig iron and steel. He even bought the shipping and rail lines needed to transport his goods. And this essentially was known as vertical consolidation. When you have control and ownership of all of the phases of production, and in this case, the production of steel. This obviously leads to low cost for Carnegie. He could cut prices for people, because essentially he has control of every single phase. So understand that these are all different techniques that were used by industrialists, fair and unfair, to gain a competitive edge over their rivals in order to make high profits. They attempted to pay as little as possible for raw materials, labor, shipping, hoping to maintain the most efficient business in their industry. And it worked. Okay, Standard Oil Company. In 1870, Rockefeller, owner of the Standard Oil Company, and several associates formed this Standard Oil Company of Ohio. Rockefeller did not need all of the services of the railroad. For example, insurance and storage, like other companies did, and as a result was able to lower his prices when doing work with the railroad. As he sold more, he was able to undersell his competitors by charging even less. This was known as horizontal consolidation, or bringing together several businesses, and in doing so, he bought out his competitors. In 1882, owners of the Standard Oil and the companies they allied with agreed to combine their operations. They would turn over their assets to a board of trustees In return, they were promised a share of profits of a new organization. The board of trustees, which Rockefeller controlled, managed the companies as a single unit called a trust. In time, 40 companies joined the trust. Because companies did not officially emerge, they did not violate any laws. Rockefeller's trust, a new kind of monopoly, controlled a higher percentage of the nation's oil refining capacity. So as you can see in the image here, an example of horizontal integration with a Standard Oil company, essentially you have the U.S. Oil Company, and then you have independent oil refineries. And Rockefeller had control of each oil refinery. Okay, this image here really shows horizontal and vertical integration. It makes it a little bit easier, I think, for you to understand. So let's talk first about vertical integration. So think of vertical integration as going up and down stairs. So vertical meaning obviously up and down. You must own all 5 steps. So production, transportation, processing, transportation, once again, and then sale to consumer. So let's think of a modern company like Walmart. Walmart controls every single step. Walmart goes out and buys the banana fields. They then transport bananas. They refine the bananas where they clean, check for pesticides, putting a sticker on it, packaging. They transport to Walmart's using trucks owned by Walmart. If you buy a banana, that is reported back to the warehouse at the end of the week. And then in a week, a truck will be shipping replacement bananas and then some. And obviously, we see a sale to the consumer. Okay, so that's a vertical integration. So with the Standard Oil Company, we might see the production of raw materials oil pumped out of the ground here. Okay, and then step 2 would be transportation of the materials to refineries. Okay, these would be then the refineries once they're transported. Refineries processing make it into something usable. Okay, and then finished product, transport, sale to consumer. And then 5 again, can go to the gas station and buy oil, gasoline. This is vertical consolidation or integration when you own all 5 steps. So then horizontal consolidation is controlling one step, going from left to right. You control one step, you can control more than one, but you can't control all, because if you can control all, then you essentially are considered vertical consolidation. You buy out competitors. So for example, Home Depot, they control step 4 and step 5. Okay, step 4 and step 5. They are trying to gain control of production as well. Down here, like lumber yards, and processing. They have 3 so far, but not all of them, so they're still considered horizontal. Again, another example would be Rockefeller. He bought out all of the oil refineries in step 3 in order to lower costs and therefore prices to sell more finished products. So he just had control of all of the oil refineries. That's horizontal. Okay, government response. So many Americans did not trust these companies. Obviously, they were working for their own interest to make a profit, and not so much, doing what they can for the worker. Prices seemed to go up no matter what the demand. They could control prices, especially if they controlled an entire industry. Government feared interfering due to the fact that they were making millions off of these companies. So the government was seeing a lot of the money from these companies, and so therefore it was hard to crack down on them. Also, these companies were an American success story of risking everything to gain money. So the Sherman Antitrust Act, this was put in place to limit the control over interstate trade or commerce, just meaning trading between states. This actually helped big businesses when used against labor unions. It was very vague wording, actually allowed the courts to decide the meaning of the law. The courts were obviously pro-business and rarely ever enforced the law. The law actually aided corporations when it was used against labor unions, simply meaning they sided with the businesses. This was because federal officials argued that labor unions restrained trade because workers were combining to gain an advantage. This act limited the amount of control a business could have over an industry. It outlawed any combination of companies that restrained interstate trade. This meaning the commercial exchange, buying and selling on domestic or international markets. Domestic meaning at home, international meaning outside of our nation, of goods and services. Or commerce, which is again is just trade between states. Trading of goods. So definition of success, 4,000 millionaires since Civil War. Riches were a sign of God's favor, and therefore the poor must be lazy or inferior. All right, working families. By 1890, 1 in 5 10 to 16-year-olds were employed, which is about 20%. Some as young as 6 or 7 were employed. For many, child labor was the difference between having or not having dinner each night. Most education ended near the age of 12 to 13 years old. So does child labor still exist today? Yes, it still exists in China and other nations around our world. Here in the United States, however, child labor is illegal, and we can thank the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA, of 1938 for that. This is also known as the child labor laws. These were enacted to ensure that when young people work, the work is safe and does not jeopardize their health, well-being, or educational opportunities. You have to be at least 14 or 15, 3 hours on a school day maximum, 18 hours within a week, and 8 hours on a non-school day, 40 hours in a non-school week, and 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., except in summer, can work until 9. All right, factory work. Most workers worked 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. They were paid a fixed amount for each finished piece they produced. This system was called piecework. Piecework took place in sweatshops. These were shops where workers worked long hours at low wages under poor working conditions. For example, they might get a few cents for a garment or a number of cigars. Those who worked the fastest and produced the most pieces were paid the most money. Division of labor, there were 2 types of workers. Artisans, which are going to be our more skilled workers. They created an object from beginning to end, doing every duty needed. Many enjoyed this work because they got to see the finished product. Unskilled workers, on the other hand, they do a simple small job over and over again without seeing the end product. This is where we see the assembly line come into play. Very tedious work and not exactly enjoyable. Many did not enjoy this type of work because it was repetitive and did not get to see the finished product. The large sizes of big businesses changed the relationship between worker and owner as well. Factory manager in 1883, for example, declared, "I regard my people as I regard my machinery. So long as they can do my work for what I choose to pay them, I keep them, getting out of them all I can." Essentially saying the factory manager was treating his workers as if they were machines. Division between rich and poor. The top 10% of the country held 75% of all of the money, while at the same time most workers only earned $100 to $200 per year. Labor's response was to either suffer or look to improve their lives through politics. Understand that politics is talking about how this should be ran or handled in some cases, labor unions. All right, socialism. Definition, economic political philosophy that favors public instead of private control or ownership. Socialists believed that society at large, not just private individuals, should take care of the nation's wealth. Wealth should be distributed equally to everyone. Private companies, for example, would be like the feed mill, Walmart, AK Steel. Public companies would be like libraries, schools, and so with socialism, private companies would then become public, and there would be very little private ownership. And as we move on that spectrum, we would move closer and closer to communism. So an example of socialism would be if you had 2 cows, the government would then take them both. They would become public ownership. They'd put them in a barn and with all the other cows, and then they'd give you as much milk as they think you need.